I paid $2 for you.
Thank you. No one else wanted me.
I think I found the hope I needed.
Me too.
This struggling cowboy had only $2 left. When he saw the girl no one wanted, he made a choice that changed both their lives forever. The wind moved slowly across the wide, dry plains, carrying dust and the smell of tired earth across a forgotten road where few travelers passed anymore. Along that lonely trail walked a man named Calder Rowan, a struggling cowboy, whose boots were worn thin by years of wandering and whose coat carried the scars of rain, sun, and countless nights sleeping beneath open skies. Calder had once been strong with hope and purpose, but time had taken much from him, leaving only quiet determination and a heart that refused to completely surrender. Years before, Calder had worked on a large cattle ranch owned by a wealthy rancher named Silas Harwood, where the grass stretched green and endless and the cattle were fat and healthy. Back then, Calder had dreams of one day owning a small ranch of his own somewhere, quiet, where he could watch the sunset every evening without worrying about the next meal. But fate had a cruel habit of turning hope into hardship. A terrible drought came, and the cattle died one by one. The ranch collapsed, and Silas Harwood vanished into the cities, leaving the workers to fend for themselves. Calder wandered from ranch to ranch, doing whatever work he could find, but each year seemed to grow harder than the last. Now he carried only a few coins in his pocket and the weight of years of disappointment on his shoulders. His horse, named Orion, walked beside him slowly, its ribs showing through its dusty coat. Calder stroked the horse's neck gently, whispering that things would somehow get better, even though he did not know how. Late one afternoon, Calder reached a small frontier town called Dry Hollow. The town looked tired and forgotten, just like him. Wooden buildings leaned crookedly, and the wind rattled loose boards as if the town itself were whispering stories of better days that had long since faded. A faded sign swung outside a saloon, while a few men stood nearby, watching strangers with cautious eyes. Calder tied Orion near a water trough and stepped into the saloon. The room smelled of old wood, spilled whiskey, and smoke. A handful of tired faces glanced up before returning to their drinks. Behind the counter stood a large man named Gideon Pike, whose beard was thick and gray. "What can I get you, traveler?" Gideon asked. Calder placed 2 small coins on the counter. "Water and maybe some bread, if that will cover it." Gideon studied the coins for a moment, then nodded and poured a cup of water and pushed a small loaf across the counter. "You look like a man who has been walking a long road," Gideon said quietly. "Feels longer every year," Calder replied.
They spoke little after that, but
Calder felt a strange calm in the quiet of the saloon. As evening approached, the door suddenly burst open, and several rough-looking men walked inside, leading a young girl by the arm. The girl looked thin and frightened. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her dark hair hung loosely around her face. Her eyes, however, held something deeper than fear, something like stubborn courage. The men laughed loudly as they pulled her forward. "Look what we found wandering near the rail camp," one of them shouted. "Nobody wants this little stray, but maybe someone here will give a few coins just to get her out of our hands." The room grew uncomfortable. Some men looked away, others chuckled uneasily. The leader of the group, a tall man named Brock Talver, pushed the girl toward the center of the room. $2, he said. "That is all it will take. Someone take her so we do not have to deal with her anymore." The girl remained silent, her eyes lowered, though her hands trembled slightly. Calder felt a tight knot forming in his chest. He had seen cruelty before, but something about the quiet strength in the girl's eyes stirred something deep inside him. One of the men at a nearby table laughed and said, "She is not worth even that." Another voice said, "Leave her outside. The wolves will take care of the problem." Calder stood slowly. The room fell quiet as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his last $2. The coins felt heavy in his palm, heavier than money should ever feel. "I will take her," he said. The men looked surprised. Brock Talver grinned wickedly as he snatched the coins from Calder's hand. "She is your problem now, cowboy," Brock said with a cruel laugh. The men left the saloon, still laughing, leaving the girl standing awkwardly beside Calder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Calder knelt slightly. so he could look into her eyes. "What is your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated before answering. "My name is Elira." "Well, Elira," he said quietly, "looks like you and I are both travelers with nowhere much to go." Gideon Pike watched the scene carefully before shaking his head softly. "You just spent your last money, friend." Calder gave a faint, tired smile. "Money comes and goes, Gideon, but leaving someone like that out there alone did not feel right." Elira looked at Calder with confusion and cautious hope. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Calder thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe because someone should have helped me once and nobody did." The girl lowered her eyes again, but this time the fear in them seemed softer, replaced by the smallest spark of trust. Night settled over. Dry Hollow as Calder prepared to leave town with Orion and the girl who had unexpectedly become part of his journey. They had no clear destination and no plan, but as they stepped onto the quiet road under the pale light of the moon, Calder felt something he had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he felt the faint, fragile return of hope. Neither of them knew that this simple moment, this small act of kindness, would begin a journey that would change both of their lives forever. And somewhere deep within Calder, weary heart, a quiet thought whispered that sometimes the smallest choices lead to the greatest destinies. Morning sunlight slowly spread across the quiet plains as Calder, Rowan, and the young girl, Elira, continued walking along the dusty trail outside the town of Dry Hollow. The land stretched wide and silent around them, with only the sound of wind brushing across dry grass and the slow footsteps of the horse, Orion following behind. Calder had not planned where they would go. He only knew that staying in Dry Hollow would bring trouble sooner or later, and trouble was something he had known too much of already. Elira walked quietly beside him, her small steps careful, as if she was still unsure whether she truly belonged there. Every now and then she glanced at Calder, as though trying to understand why a stranger, who barely had enough for himself, would choose to help someone like her. Calder noticed those glances, but said nothing at first, because he knew trust was not something that came quickly to people who had been treated as if they had no worth. The road ahead curved toward distant hills, where thin trees dotted the horizon. The air was cool and carried the smell of wild sage. Calder finally broke the silence. "You ever ride a horse, Elira?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, sir." Calder stopped and lifted her gently onto Orion's back. The horse shifted slightly, but remained calm. "No reason to walk all day if we have a horse strong enough to carry both of us," Calder said with a tired smile. Elira held the saddle carefully, her eyes wide with both fear and excitement. "Thank you," she whispered. They traveled most of the day until the sun began to fall behind the hills, turning the sky gold and deep orange. Calder found a small clearing near a narrow stream where grass still grew green. He helped Elira down from the horse and gathered a few sticks to build a small fire. As the fire crackled softly, Elira sat near the water, watching the flames dance across the darkening ground. For a long time she said nothing, but finally she spoke in a quiet voice. "I used to live with my mother," she said. "We traveled from place to place because she worked in camps cooking for workers. But one winter she became sick and there was no doctor. She passed away before spring came." Calder listened silently, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "After that, people kept telling me to move along," she continued. "Some towns did not want me. Some people tried to use me for work without food or pay. Eventually, I stopped trusting anyone." Calder looked down at the fire, remembering his own lonely years. "Life can be hard on the road," he said slowly. "But sometimes the road also leads you somewhere better." Elira studied his face carefully. "Do you really believe that?" Calder thought for a moment before answering. "I did not for a long time, but maybe I am starting to again." The following days became a quiet routine. They traveled through open plains, crossed narrow rivers, and slept beneath the stars. Elira slowly began to smile more often. She helped gather berries and learned how to care for Orion. Calder even showed her how to hold the reins and guide the horse along easy paths. One evening as they camped near a small group of cottonwood trees, Calder noticed smoke rising far in the distance. "Looks like a ranch or settlement," he said. "Maybe we can find some work there." The next morning they followed the trail toward the smoke. After several miles they reached a modest ranch, surrounded by wooden fences where a few cattle grazed slowly in the fields. A man stood near the barn repairing a broken gate. He was older, with strong shoulders and kind eyes. His name was Dorian Hale. Calder approached carefully and greeted him politely. "Morning, sir. My name is Calder Rowan. I was wondering if you might need a hand around the ranch for a few days." Dorian studied Calder and then looked toward Elira, sitting quietly on Orion. "Times have been rough here too," the rancher said, "but I never turn away someone willing to work, especially when a child is involved." Calder felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, sir." Dorian nodded slowly. "Work hard, treat the land right, and you both can stay as long as you need." Days turned into weeks. Calder worked from sunrise to sunset repairing fences, feeding cattle, and clearing dry brush. Elira helped around the small house with Dorian's sister, Maribel, who had come to live there after losing her own family years earlier. The ranch slowly came alive again under their care. Grass began growing stronger, and the cattle grew healthier. Calder found something he had not felt in many years, a sense of belonging. One afternoon, as Calder fixed a broken wagon wheel, Dorian approached him. "You work like a man who carries heavy memories," Dorian said. Calder wiped the dust from his hands. "I suppose that is true." Dorian looked across the fields where Elira laughed while chasing a young calf. "That girl seems happier here than any child I have seen in a long time." Calder nodded quietly. Dorian placed a firm hand on Calder's shoulder. "This ranch has more land than I can manage alone. I've been thinking about something. If you are willing to stay, we could run this place together." Calder looked at him with surprise. "Are you serious?" Dorian smiled gently. "A ranch needs people who care about it, not just people who work for coins." Calder turned his eyes toward the fields, where the wind moved softly through the grass. Elira waved at him from across the pasture, her laughter echoing across the open land. In that moment, Calder realized something important. The $2 he had given away in that dusty saloon had not taken anything from him. Instead, it had given him something he thought he had lost forever: a new beginning. Years later, travelers passing through that region often spoke of a peaceful ranch surrounded by strong fences, wide fields, and the sound of laughter carried by the wind. The ranch was known as Hope Valley, and it was run by a cowboy named Calder Rowan, a wise rancher named Dorian Hale, and a young woman named Elira, whose kindness welcomed every stranger who arrived at their gate. And though few people knew the full story, the truth remained simple. A struggling cowboy once paid $2 for the girl no one wanted, and in doing so he found the hope he needed to build a life worth living under the endless western sky.